The bell rang at exactly 8:15 a.m., and the hallways of Lincoln High School buzzed with the usual morning chaos. Students rushed to their lockers, slamming metal doors and shouting to friends across the crowded corridor. But in room 204, the advanced music theory classroom, a different kind of energy filled the air. This was where the school's most talented musicians gathered, where future conservatory students practiced their craft, and where teachers expected nothing less than excellence. In the back corner of this prestigious classroom sat a girl who didn't quite fit the mold. Her name was Lily, and she had just transferred to Lincoln High 3 weeks ago. Everything about her seemed out of place in this room full of confident, well-dressed students. Her clothes came from the discount store downtown. Her backpack had a broken zipper held together with safety pins, and her sneakers were so worn that the soles were starting to peel away from the fabric. But what really set Lily apart wasn't her appearance. It was the way she carried herself. While other students chatted loudly about their private lessons and upcoming performances, Lily kept her head down, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face. She clutched a spiral notebook that had seen better days, its cover bent and torn at the corners. Inside were pages filled with musical notations, but nobody bothered to look. Nobody bothered to ask. The classroom itself was impressive. A beautiful grand piano sat in the corner, its black surface gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Music stands lined the walls, and posters of famous composers looked down from every available space. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven. And Chopin seemed to watch over the students like stern guardians of classical tradition. Mr. Davidson, the head of the music department, stood at the front of the class with his arms crossed. He was a tall man in his 50s, with graying hair and glasses that he constantly pushed up his nose. He had taught at Lincoln High for 20 years and had a reputation for being tough but fair. At least, that's what people said about him. But fair is a word that can mean different things to different people. When Lily first tried to enroll in his advanced class, Mr. Davidson had looked at her transfer papers with obvious doubt written all across his face. Her previous school was small, rural, and definitely not known for its music program. In his mind, there was no way a student from that kind of background could keep up with the rigorous curriculum he had designed. "I'm sorry, but I don't think this class is appropriate for your skill level," he had told her during their first meeting. His voice wasn't mean exactly, but it wasn't kind either. It was the voice of someone who had already made up his mind, and wasn't interested in being proven wrong. Lily had stood in his office, her hands twisting together nervously. "Please, sir. Music is everything to me. I promise I can keep up." Her voice was quiet but determined, barely above a whisper. Mr. Davidson had sighed, the kind of long, tired sigh that teachers make when they think a student is wasting their time. "It's not about keeping up. It's about meeting standards. This class prepares students for conservatory auditions and national competitions. We can't slow down for someone who needs remedial work." The word remedial had stung like a slap across the face. But Lily didn't argue. She had learned long ago that arguing rarely helped. Instead, she had gone to her guidance counselor, Mrs. Chen, who fought hard to get her into the class. After several tense meetings and what felt like endless paperwork, Mr. Davidson finally agreed to let Lily audit the course. She could sit in and observe, but she wouldn't be graded like the other students. She wouldn't be given the same opportunities. Now, 3 weeks into the semester, nothing had changed. If anything, things had gotten worse. "Today we're going to analyze Bach's Fugue in C minor," Mr. Davidson announced, writing on the whiteboard with sharp, precise strokes. "This piece is fundamental to understanding counterpoint and the Baroque style. Can anyone tell me what makes Bach's fugues so remarkable?" Hands shot up immediately. The students in the front row were always eager to answer, always ready to show off their knowledge. These were the kids who had been studying music since they could walk, whose parents paid hundreds of dollars for private lessons every month. "The mathematical precision," called out Jennifer, a blonde girl who sat in the front row and played violin in the youth symphony. Bach used complex mathematical relationships in his compositions. "Excellent," Mr. Davidson nodded approvingly, and the layering of voices creates a rich harmonic texture that was revolutionary for its time. As the discussion continued, Lily listened carefully. She had studied Bach extensively with her grandmother back when things were different, when her family could still afford the life they used to have. She knew these fugues intimately, had played them hundreds of times, until her fingers knew every note by muscle memory alone. And as she listened to the discussion, she noticed something. The interpretation Mr. Davidson was presenting was interesting, but it wasn't the only way to understand the piece. Her hand lifted slowly, hesitantly, like a flower trying to grow in concrete. Her heart pounded in her chest. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe if she contributed something meaningful, they would see that she belonged here too. Mr. Davidson's eyes swept across the room and landed on her raised hand. For a moment, his expression flickered with something like surprise. Then his eyebrows drew together in a slight frown. "Yes, Lily." His tone was neutral, but something about it made several students turn around to look at her. A few exchanged glances and smirked. Lily's mouth felt dry. "I was just thinking, there's another way to interpret the third movement. If you consider the historical context of when Bach wrote this piece and the religious symbolism he often embedded in his work, the counterpoint could represent something more spiritual. The conversation between voices might be like a prayer, with each line representing a different aspect of faith, reaching toward the divine." The classroom fell silent. For a brief moment, Lily thought maybe her contribution had been valuable. Maybe she had finally said something that would make them see her differently. Then Mr. Davidson cleared his throat. "That's quite an imaginative interpretation." The way he said imaginative made it clear he didn't mean it as a compliment. "However, we're discussing musical theory here, not creative writing. Perhaps you should focus on understanding the basic structural elements before attempting advanced analysis." Heat rushed to Lily's cheeks. Several students in the front row giggled behind their hands. One boy whispered something to his neighbor, and they both laughed louder. Even students who had seemed nice before wouldn't meet her eyes now. Nobody wanted to be associated with the girl who had just embarrassed herself. Lily sank lower in her seat, wishing she could disappear completely. Outside the classroom window, she could see other students walking across the campus lawn, laughing and carefree. They didn't have to sit here feeling stupid, feeling small, feeling like they would never be good enough, no matter what they did. Through the glass window in the classroom door, Lily caught a glimpse of two other teachers passing by. They paused, looking into the room, and she saw them shake their heads slightly before moving on. Even teachers she had never spoken to seemed to have already decided who she was and what she was capable of. The rest of the class dragged on like torture. Every minute felt like an hour. When the bell finally rang, Lily grabbed her worn notebook and hurried out of the room before anyone could say anything else. She didn't see the way Mr. Davidson watched her leave, his expression unreadable. She didn't hear the conversations that started as soon as she was gone. All she knew was that she had tried to speak up, tried to show them she belonged, and once again, she had been put back in her place. The question that burned in her mind as she walked down the empty hallway was simple but painful. How many times could a person be knocked down before they stopped getting back up? The weeks that followed were harder than Lily could have imagined. Every day felt like walking through a minefield where she never knew when the next explosion would come. The worst part wasn't even the students anymore. She had dealt with mean kids before. What hurt the most was realizing that the teachers, the adults who were supposed to encourage and protect students, were the ones leading the charge against her. It started small. A raised eyebrow here, a dismissive comment there, but soon it became something bigger, something that felt almost deliberate. During choir practice on a Wednesday afternoon, Mrs. Patterson, the choir director, decided to test everyone's sight reading skills. Sight reading is when you look at a piece of music you've never seen before and have to sing or play it correctly on the first try. It's a skill that takes years to develop, and it separates the serious musicians from the casual ones. One by one, Mrs. Patterson called students to the front of the room. Each person would stand beside the piano, look at the sheet music for 30 seconds, and then perform it. Most students did reasonably well. A few stumbled over the harder passages, but Mrs. Patterson would nod encouragingly and say things like, "Good effort, or you'll get it with practice." Then it was Lily's turn. She walked to the front of the room on shaky legs, very aware that every eye in the choir was watching her, Mrs. Patterson handed her the sheet music without even looking at her face. The piece was actually not that difficult, a simple melody in the key of G major. Lily had sight-read much harder pieces than this. She studied the music for the allotted 30 seconds, took a deep breath, and began to sing. Her voice was soft at first. Nervous, but she hit every note correctly. The rhythm was perfect. She didn't miss a single rest or dynamic marking. When she finished, she looked up at Mrs. Patterson, hoping for at least a small nod of approval. Instead, Mrs. Patterson's lips pressed into a thin line. "Did your old school actually have a real music program, dear?" Her voice dripped with fake concern, the kind of tone adults use when they're trying to sound nice but really aren't, because your technique is quite ... basic. "Will need to work on that if you want to stay in this choir." The room erupted in giggles and whispers. Lily felt her face burn with shame. She had performed the piece correctly. Everyone in that room knew it, but somehow that didn't matter. Nothing she did would ever be good enough for these teachers. She walked back to her seat with her eyes fixed on the floor, each step feeling like she was carrying a heavy weight on her shoulders. But the real breaking point came when the announcements went up about the regional school's music competition. This was the biggest event of the year, the competition that every serious music student dreamed about. Schools from 5 different counties would send their best performers to compete in various categories. Lincoln High had won the overall championship for 5 years straight, and the trophy case, in the main hallway, displayed their victories with pride. The sign-up sheet appeared on the music room bulletin board on a Monday morning. Students crowded around it, excitedly writing their names and the pieces they planned to perform. Lily watched from a distance at first, not sure if she was even allowed to participate. After all, she was only auditing the advanced class. Maybe this competition was off-limits to her, but the more she thought about it, the more she wanted to try. Music was the one thing in her life that made sense, the one thing that felt completely hers. Competitions had rules and judges who didn't know anything about her background or her worn-out clothes. They would only hear her play, and that was it. For once, she would be judged purely on her talent and nothing else. During lunch that day, Lily walked to Mr. Davidson's office with an application form clutched in her hands. She had filled it out carefully, writing her name in neat letters and selecting one of Batch's Italian concertos as her performance piece. It was challenging, but beautiful, and she knew it well enough to perform it with confidence. She knocked softly on his office door. "Come in," his voice called from inside. When she entered, Mr. Davidson was sitting at his desk, eating a sandwich and looking through a stack of papers. He glanced up at her with an expression that made it clear he didn't want to be interrupted. "Yes, Lily. What do you need?" He didn't invite her to sit down. "I wanted to ask about the regional competition," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'd like to participate. I have my application form filled out." She held out the paper, but Mr. Davidson didn't reach for it. Instead, he put down his sandwich and leaned back in his chair, studying her with a look that made her stomach twist into knots. "Hey, Lily," he said slowly, like he was explaining something to a small child. "The regional competition is for serious musicians. These are students who have been training for years, who have private instructors and performance experience. It's not just about being able to play an instrument. It's about representing our school at the highest level." "I understand that," Lily said quietly, "but I've been playing since I was little. I can perform the piece well. I just want a chance to try." Mr. Davidson shook his head, and there was something almost pitying in his expression. It was worse than anger or annoyance. Pity meant he didn't even see her as a threat or competition. He saw her as someone who didn't understand how far out of her league she really was. "Perhaps next year," he said, turning his attention back to his papers. "After you've had time to catch up with the curriculum, after you've proven you can handle the basics. This competition is too important to our school's reputation to take chances on untested students." The dismissal was clear. Lily stood there for a moment longer, still holding her application form, not quite able to believe what had just happened. She had been rejected without even being given a chance to audition, without any proof that she couldn't do it. Just rejected because of assumptions about who she was and where she came from. She started to say, "That will be all." Lily? Mr. Davidson's voice was firm now, with an edge that said the conversation was over. Close the door on your way out. Lily left his office, feeling numb. She walked through the hallway in a daze, barely noticing the other students rushing past her. The application form in her hand felt like a joke now, a stupid piece of paper that represented nothing but false hope. She crumpled it up and threw it in the trash can by the water fountain. Later that week, Lily was walking past the teacher's lounge when she heard voices inside. The door was slightly open, and she recognized Mrs. Patterson's voice immediately. She should have kept walking. She should have put in her earbuds and pretended she heard nothing. But something made her stop, and what she heard next would stay with her for a long time. I honestly don't know why we're wasting resources on that Chen girl, Mrs. Patterson was saying. The dismissive tone in her voice was unmistakable. She barely participates in class, shows no real talent, and frankly, I think she's in over her head. Some students just don't have what it takes, no matter how much we try to help them. The guidance counselor pushed hard to get her into the advanced class. Another voice replied. It sounded like Mr. Roberts, who taught music history. But I agree with you. She doesn't seem to have the background or the drive for this level of study. It's a kindness, really, Mrs. Patterson continued. Better she learns now that this isn't her path than waste years pursuing something she'll never excel at. Some people are meant to be musicians, and some people aren't. That's just reality. Lily's hand, which had been reaching for the door handle, froze in midair. Her application form for the competition had been in that hand just days ago, before she threw it away. Now she stood outside the teacher's lounge, listening to adults who were supposed to support students tear her down like she was nothing. The worst part was the casual way they talked about her, like discussing the weather or what to have for lunch. There was no malice in their voices, no anger, just matter-of-fact dismissal of her abilities and her dreams. Somehow that hurt even more than if they had been actively cruel. Lily backed away from the door slowly, carefully, making sure her footsteps didn't make any sound. She turned and walked down the empty hallway, past the trophy cases full of Lincoln High's victories, past the posters advertising the upcoming competition, past everything that had once represented hope and possibility. When she finally made it outside, the afternoon sun was bright and warm, completely at odds with the cold emptiness she felt inside. She sat down on a concrete bench near the parking lot and let the tears come. Not loud sobs, just quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks and dripped onto her worn-out sneakers. How was she supposed to keep going? How was she supposed to walk into that music room day after day knowing what they really thought of her? The teachers had made their decision about who she was, and nothing she did seemed capable of changing their minds. But even as she cried, even as the hurt and humiliation washed over her, a small spark of something else flickered in her chest. It wasn't quite anger, and it wasn't quite determination. It was something in between, something that whispered one simple question. What if they were wrong about her? What if she was capable of so much more than they could see? What nobody at Lincoln High knew, what none of the teachers who dismissed Lily so icily could have guessed, was that she had a secret. It wasn't the kind of secret that gets whispered about in school hallways or shared between friends at lunch. It was the kind of secret that lived in her fingers, in her soul, in every fiber of her being. And it was a secret she had learned to keep hidden because showing it to the world had only brought her pain before. Lily had been playing piano since she was 4 years old. Not just playing, but really playing, the way professional musicians do. Her teacher hadn't been some local instructor giving half-hearted lessons in a strip mall studio. Her teacher had been her grandmother, a woman named Wei, who had once performed in concert halls across Shanghai, whose fingers had danced across piano keys in front of thousands of people, whose talent had been recognized by the most prestigious music conservatories in China. Grandmother Wei had fled to America in the late 1970s, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and a lifetime of music in her memory. She had left behind fame and recognition, choosing freedom over comfort. In America, she worked ordinary jobs during the day, cleaning houses and working in restaurant kitchens. But at night, she would find old pianos in churches and community centers, and she would play like her life depended on it. When Lily was born, Grandmother Wei saw something special in her granddaughter's eyes. Maybe it was the way baby Lily would stop crying the moment she heard music, or the way her tiny hands would reach for the piano keys before she could even walk properly. Whatever it was, Grandmother Wei knew that she had to pass on everything she had learned, everything she had sacrificed to this little girl. The lessons started gently. Grandmother Wei would sit Lily on her lap at the old upright piano in their small apartment and guide her fingers across the keys. She taught her to feel the music, not just play it. Music is not about the notes on the page, she would say in her accented English, mixed with Mandarin words when English failed to capture what she meant. Music is about the space between the notes, the breathing, the story you tell with your hands and your heart. By the time Lily was 7, she could play pieces that most adult pianists would struggle with. Chopin's nocturnes, Beethoven's sonatas, Bach's inventions. They all flowed from her small fingers with a maturity and depth that seemed impossible for someone so young. Grandmother Wei was strict, but loving, pushing Lily to perfection, but always with gentle encouragement, and warm hugs when the frustration became too much. Those were happy years. Years when Lily's family had enough money for a real piano, for music books, for everything a young prodigy needed. Her father worked as an engineer at a successful tech company, and her mother taught mathematics at a local college. Life was comfortable, even good. Lily won competitions, performed in recitals, and everyone who heard her play knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. But then everything changed. When Lily was 13, her father got sick. Really sick. The kind of sickness that eats up savings accounts and drowns families in medical bills. Her mother had to quit her teaching job to take care of him full-time. The real piano was sold to pay for treatments. The comfortable house was traded for a small apartment in a cheaper neighborhood. Private lessons became impossible luxuries. Competition fees were out of the question. Worse than all of that, Grandmother Wei passed away just before Lily turned 15. The woman who had taught her everything, who had seen the world in music and taught Lily to see it the same way, was gone. Lily had played at her grandmother's funeral, performing one of Wei's favorite pieces through tears that wouldn't stop falling. After that, playing piano became both a joy and a source of deep pain. Every note reminded her of what she had lost. At her old school, when Lily had tried to continue with music, tried to show her classmates what she could do, things had gone badly. Kids didn't understand why she took music so seriously. They called her a show-off, a teacher's pet, too intense. They said she was weird for caring so much about something that was supposed to be fun. The bullying got so bad that Lily learned to hide her abilities to play dumb, to blend in with everyone else, even though it felt like cutting off a part of herself. That's why she stayed quiet at Lincoln High. That's why she never volunteered to play, never mentioned her background, never told anyone about the years of intensive training with one of the finest pianists China had ever produced. She had learned that being talented only made you a target, and she was tired of having targets on her back. But hiding who she really was came with its own kind of pain. It was like being a bird with wings that never got to fly, or a runner who had to walk everywhere, even though every muscle in their body wanted to sprint. At night, lying in bed in her family's small apartment, Lily would feel her fingers moving unconsciously, playing invisible pianos, running through difficult passages that only existed in her memory. The one place she could still be herself was the school auditorium late at night. The building was supposed to be locked after 6 p.m., but the janitor, Mr. Rodriguez, had found Lily sitting outside the auditorium doors. One evening, about 2 weeks after she started at Lincoln High, she had been crying quietly, trying to hold it all inside, but failing. Mr. Rodriguez was a kind man in his 60s, with gray hair and gentle eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He sat down next to her on the floor, not saying anything at first, just being present. Finally, he asked her what was wrong. And maybe because she was so tired of holding everything in, maybe because his eyes reminded her a little bit of her grandmother's, Lily told him everything. About Grandmother Wei, about her training, about losing everything, about being invisible at school. "Why don't you show them what you can do?" Mr. Rodriguez had asked. "Because every time I do, people find a way to make me regret it," Lily answered quietly. Mr. Rodriguez had been quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised her. "I used to teach music. Long time ago, before I became a janitor, had to stop because of arthritis in my hands." He held up his gnarled fingers. "But I still remember what real talent looks like. And I'm guessing you've got it." He stood up and pulled out his keys. "The auditorium has a beautiful Steinway grand piano. Nobody uses it after school hours. If you want to practice, I'll let you in. Just between us." That's how it started. Every night, after the last teacher went home and the hallways went dark, Lily would meet Mr. Rodriguez at the auditorium doors. He would unlock them, turn on just enough lights for her to see the piano, and then he would sit in the back row and listen while she played. And when Lily played in that empty auditorium, she transformed. All the quietness and uncertainty that she carried during the day disappeared. Her fingers flew across the keys with breathtaking speed and precision, handling runs and arpeggios that would make professional pianists nervous. She played Rachmaninoff's impossibly difficult concertos, Liszt's technical showpieces, Chopin's emotional nocturnes. She played with the technical mastery of someone who had trained for thousands of hours, but also with the deep emotional understanding that only comes from living. Through real pain and loss, Mr. Rodriguez would sit in the darkness, tears streaming down his weathered face, watching this quiet girl who everyone underestimated become something magnificent. After she finished playing each night, he would shake his head in amazement. "Child," he said one evening after she had finished playing one of Debussy's most challenging pieces, "why do you hide this? The world needs to hear you play." Lily's hands rested on the piano keys, her head bowed. "Because every time I let people see who I really am, they find reasons to hurt me. At least when I'm invisible, I'm safe." "But you're also alone," Mr. Rodriguez said gently. "And that gift your grandmother gave you, it's not meant to be hidden away like a secret. Music is meant to be shared." "They already decided I'm not good enough," Lily said, her voice breaking slightly. "Mr. Davidson, Mrs. Patterson, all of them. They look at me and see someone who doesn't belong. Nothing I do will change their minds." "Then maybe you're playing for the wrong audience," Mr. Rodriguez said. "Maybe you need to stop trying to prove yourself to people who've already decided not to see you." Those words stayed with Lily as she walked home that night through the dark streets. The truth was, she was tired. Tired of hiding, tired of being small, tired of letting other people's opinions determine her worth. But she was also scared. What if she showed everyone who she really was, and they still rejected her? What if her best still wasn't good enough? What if her grandmother's legacy, everything Wei had taught her and believed in, ended up meaning nothing? These questions swirled in her mind as she climbed the stairs to her family's apartment. Her father was asleep in the bedroom, his medication making him drowsy. Her mother was working a night. The day started like any other Thursday. Lily arrived at school early, grabbed her books from her locker, and headed to her first class. The hallways smelled like floor cleaner and the cafeteria's breakfast burritos. Students rushed past her, laughing and talking, existing in a world that seemed separate from hers. She had gotten used to being invisible, and honestly, some days it felt safer that way. But by third period, something was different. There was an energy in the air, a nervous electricity that seemed to pulse through the school. Students whispered. In clusters, teachers had worried expressions, and by lunchtime, everyone knew what had happened. Jennifer Walsh, Lincoln High's star piano performer, the girl who had won every competition she'd entered for the past 3 years, the one who was supposed to represent the school at the regional competition in 2 days, was sick. Not just regular sick with a cold or flu. She had been rushed to the hospital the night before with severe pneumonia and was now on oxygen. Too weak to even sit up in bed. The music department was in full panic mode. Lily heard about it from other students first, their voices carrying. Across the cafeteria, as she ate her lunch alone at a corner table, "Can you believe it? 2 days before the competition? What are they going to do?" Jennifer was doing Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto. "That piece is insane. Nobody else can play it. Lincoln's winning streak is over. There's no way we can compete without her." Lily's heart started beating faster. She knew that piece. She knew it so well that she could play it in her sleep. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 was one of the most technically demanding works in classical piano repertoire. It required massive hands to stretch across the keys, incredible stamina to sustain the energy throughout all three movements, and the emotional maturity to convey the deep, sweeping romanticism that made the piece so beloved. Grandmother Wei had taught it to her when she was 14, spending months breaking down every measure, every chord, every subtle dynamic shift. "This piece is about struggle and triumph," Wei had said. Rachmaninoff wrote it when he was depressed, when he thought he would never compose again. Every note is him fighting his way back to life. You must play it like you understand that fight. And Lily did understand it. She had lived her own version of that fight, losing her grandmother, watching her father get sick, seeing everything comfortable and stable in her life crumble away. When she played Rachmaninoff late at night in the empty auditorium, she poured all of that pain and resilience into the music. Mr. Rodriguez had told her once that her interpretation made him weep, but none of that mattered because nobody at this school knew she could play it. Nobody knew she could play anything. The afternoon brought an emergency meeting of all the music teachers. Lily saw them gathered in Mr. Davidson's office through the window as she passed by on her way to last period. Their faces were stressed, their gestures sharp and frustrated. She could imagine the conversation. Who could possibly perform such a difficult piece with only 2 days' notice? What would they tell the competition organizers? How would they save Lincoln High's reputation? After school, as Lily was putting books in her locker, she saw Mr. Rodriguez walking down the hallway with his cleaning cart. He caught her eye and gave her a meaningful look, the kind of look that said he was thinking the same thing she was thinking. He walked past her slowly and said, just loud enough for her to hear, "Sometimes the universe gives us chances we didn't ask for. The question is whether we're brave enough to take them." Then he kept walking, his cart squeaking slightly as it rolled across the tile floor. Lily closed her locker and stood there for a long moment. Her hands were shaking. She knew what Mr. Rodriguez was suggesting. She could offer to perform. She could walk into Mr. Davidson's office right now and tell him she knew the Rachmaninoff concerto, that she could save their competition entry, that she could help the school. But the fear was overwhelming. What if? She offered and they laughed at her. What if they didn't believe she could do it? What if they let her try and she failed in front of everyone? The humiliation would be unbearable. It was safer to stay quiet, to stay invisible, to not risk having her heart broken again. She walked home in a daze, barely noticing the route she took. That evening, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The Rachmaninoff concerto kept playing. In her head, her fingers twitching with the muscle memory of 1,000 practice sessions. She thought about Grandmother Wei, about all those hours of training, about the belief Wei had in her. "You are meant for great things," her grandmother used to say. "Don't ever let anyone convince you to be smaller than you are." But being small felt safe. Being small meant nobody could hurt you. The next morning, Friday, the day before the competition, Lily arrived at school to find even more chaos. The word had spread beyond the music department now. Everyone knew that Lincoln High might have to withdraw from the competition for the first time in 6 years. The principal had apparently gotten involved. Parents were calling. It was a whole situation. During lunch, Lily sat in her usual corner spot when she noticed Mr. Rodriguez coming into the cafeteria. He never came in during lunch. He made eye contact with her and tilted his head slightly toward the door. She understood. He wanted to talk to her. She found him waiting in the hallway outside the auditorium. His expression was serious but kind. "I did something," he said quietly. "I hope you won't be mad at me." Lily's stomach dropped. "What did you do?" "Talked to Mr. Davidson this morning. I told him there was a student who could perform the Rachmaninoff piece. I told him I'd heard this student play it, and it was extraordinary. I didn't say who it was, but I told him if he wanted to save the school's competition entry, he needed to give this student a chance." Lily felt like the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. "Mr. Rodriguez, why would you do that? They're going to think it's a joke. They're desperate," Mr. Rodriguez interrupted gently. "And desperate people sometimes see things they wouldn't normally see. Mr. Davidson asked me who the student was. I told him I'd let them come forward themselves, that it had to be their choice." "I can't." Lily whispered. "You don't understand what they think of me. Mr. Davidson literally told me I wasn't good enough for the competition. Mrs. Patterson thinks I don't have any real talent. They've made up their minds about me." "Then change their minds," Mr. Rodriguez said simply. "I've heard you play, Lily. I've been around music my whole life, and I've never heard anyone your age play the way you do. Yes, they might reject you. Yes, it's a risk. But staying invisible for the rest of your life is also a risk. It's the risk of never knowing what you could have been." The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Students started flooding into the hallways. Mr. Rodriguez put a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "The meeting is at 3 o'clock in Mr. Davidson's office. The one where they decide whether to withdraw from the competition or not. That's when you need to make your choice. Be brave, child. For yourself, and for your grandmother who gave you this gift." He walked away, leaving Lily standing alone in the crowded hallway. The afternoon classes were torture. Lily couldn't focus on anything. Her mind kept jumping between possibilities. What if she walked into that meeting and offered to play? What if they said no? What if they said yes, but she failed? What if she succeeded and nothing changed anyway? The what-ifs were endless and terrifying. At 2:45, Lily found herself standing outside Mr. Davidson's office. Through the window, she could see him, Mrs. Patterson, and 2 other music teachers sitting around a table. They all looked defeated, like people who had already accepted a loss. Her hand reached for the door handle, then dropped. Reached again, dropped again. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to run away, to stay safe, to protect herself from more rejection and pain. But then she thought about Grandmother Way sitting at that old upright piano in their apartment, her arthritic fingers still finding the beauty in every note. She thought about all the hours of practice, all the sacrifices, all the love that had been poured into teaching her. She thought about Mr. Rodriguez's words. Staying invisible was also a risk. And she thought about the music itself, the Rachmaninoff concerto that had been written by a man who thought his career was over, who climbed out of depression through sheer determination and created something beautiful from his pain. If he could do that, couldn't she at least try? At exactly 3 o'clock, Lily knocked on the door. Her hand trembled, but the knock was firm enough to hear. "Come in," Mr. Davidson's tired voice called out. Lily opened the door and stepped inside. All 4 teachers looked at her with surprise and confusion. Clearly, they hadn't expected a student to interrupt their meeting. "I'm sorry to bother you," Lily said, her voice much quieter than she wanted it to be. "But I heard about Jennifer being sick and about the competition, and I wanted to tell you something." She took a breath, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. "I can play the Rachmaninoff Piano Concerto No. 2. I know it well. If you need someone to perform it, I can do it." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Patterson's mouth actually fell open. Mr. Davidson stared at. The walk to the auditorium felt like it took forever and no time at all. Lily's legs moved automatically, one foot in front of the other, while her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Behind her, she could hear the teachers' footsteps and their quiet murmurs to each other. She didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. They thought this was going to be a disaster. When they entered the auditorium, the space felt different than it did during her late-night practice sessions with Mr. Rodriguez. The overhead lights were all on, bright and exposing. The rows of red velvet seats stretched out like an audience of judgmental witnesses. And there, on the stage under a spotlight, sat the beautiful Steinway grand piano that Lily had played so many times in the darkness. "Go ahead," Mr. Davidson said, gesturing toward the stage. His voice carried that same careful tone, like he was humoring a child who didn't understand reality. "Whenever you're ready." Lily climbed the steps to the stage. Her worn sneakers made soft, squeaking sounds on the polished wood. She could feel the teacher's eyes on her back as she walked to the piano bench and sat down. The bench was exactly the right height. She had adjusted it herself during those night practices. Knowing precisely where she needed to be for optimal reach and comfort, she placed her hands on the keys without playing, just feeling the cool, smooth surface under her fingertips. This piano knew her. She knew it. They had shared hundreds of hours together when nobody was watching from the auditorium seats. As Mrs. Patterson's voice called out, "Take your time, dear. This is a very difficult piece. It's okay if you can't remember all of it." The condescension in her voice was clear. They expected her to stumble through maybe the opening bars before admitting she was in over her head. They had probably already decided this was a waste of time. Lily closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she heard Grandmother Way's voice, soft and encouraging. The music lives in your heart first, your hands second. Feel it before you play it. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. Her grandmother's patient teaching in that small apartment. Her father's illness, losing the comfortable life they used to have. The bullying at her old school, the dismissal and mockery she had endured at Lincoln High. She thought about all the times she had made herself small and invisible, all the times she had hidden her light, because showing it had only brought pain. But she also thought about the music itself, about Rachmaninoff sitting at a piano, depressed and convinced his career as a composer was over, somehow finding the strength to create something beautiful from his suffering. About her grandmother leaving everything behind in China to start over in a new country, keeping music alive in her heart through years of struggle. About every person who had ever faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. Then Lily began to play. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 rang out through the auditorium, powerful and commanding. The piece starts with a series of massive chords that build in intensity, like a heartbeat growing stronger, like someone rising up from darkness. Lily's hands moved across the keys with absolute certainty, her fingers striking each note with perfect precision. In the audience seats, Mr. Davidson sat up straighter, Mrs. Patterson's mouth opened slightly. The other two teachers leaned forward, their expressions changing from bored skepticism to genuine attention. But Lily wasn't playing for them anymore. She was playing for herself, for her grandmother, for every person who had ever been underestimated and dismissed. Her entire body moved with the music, swaying and leaning into the emotional peaks and valleys of the composition. This wasn't just technical perfection, though. The technical aspects were flawless. This was music that came from somewhere deep and real. The first movement is long and demanding, full of cascading runs that travel up and down the entire keyboard at breathtaking speed. Lily's fingers flew across the keys, never hesitating, never stumbling. Passages that would make most pianists nervous flowed from her like water, natural and effortless. Her hands stretched to reach the enormous chords that Rachmaninoff had written for his own massive hands. And somehow she made it work. But it was the emotion that really captured the room. The melody soared and wept, celebrated and mourned. You could hear the struggle in it, the pain of someone fighting through darkness toward light. Every dynamic shift, every subtle change in tempo, every moment where the music breathed. Lily played it all with the understanding of someone who had lived through her own version of that journey. In the fourth row, Mr. Davidson felt something he hadn't felt in years. His eyes were stinging. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain his composure, but there was no denying what he was hearing. This wasn't just good. This was extraordinary. This was the kind of playing you heard from concert pianists with decades of experience, not from a 17-year-old girl. Sneakers who he had dismissed as unprepared. Mrs. Patterson had tears rolling down her cheeks openly now. She thought about the conversation in the teacher's lounge, the casual cruelty of her words about this girl having no real talent. The shame hit her like a physical weight. As Lily moved into the second movement, the music transformed. This section is quieter, more introspective, built around one of the most beautiful melodies ever written. It's the kind of music that makes you think about everything you've lost and everything you've loved. Lily played it with such tenderness that it felt like she was sharing something deeply personal with everyone in the room. Mr. Roberts, who taught music history and thought he had heard everything, realized he was witnessing something special. This wasn't just a talented student. This was an artist. The difference between the two was everything. The third movement builds back up to a triumphant finale, technically demanding and emotionally powerful. Lily attacked it with renewed energy, her hands racing across the keys and passages that blur together into walls of sound. The music builds and builds, climbing toward its conclusion with unstoppable momentum. And then the final chords. Lily struck them with everything she had, letting them ring out through the auditorium, filling every corner of the space with sound. When the last note faded away into silence, She lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched out, and for one terrible second, Lily thought maybe she had failed after all. Maybe even playing her best wasn't good enough. Then Mr. Davidson stood up. He was clapping, and there were tears on his face that he didn't bother to hide. Mrs. Patterson stood up next. Then Mr. Roberts, then the fourth teacher, whose name Lily barely knew. All of them were applauding, and the sound echoed through the empty auditorium like thunder. Lily stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs. She felt drained, like she had run a marathon, but also strangely light. She had done it. She had shown them who she really was, and the sky hadn't fallen. The world hadn't ended. Mr. Davidson walked down the aisle toward the stage, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes. "Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. A serious apology. I've been teaching music for 23 years, and what I just heard?" He shook his head. "Where did you learn to play like that?" "My grandmother taught me," Lily said quietly. "She was a concert pianist in China before she came to America. She trained me from the time I was 4 years old." "Why didn't you tell us?" Mrs. Patterson asked, climbing onto the stage. Her face showed genuine confusion and regret. "Why did you hide this?" Lily looked at her for a long moment. "Because I tried not hiding it before and people hurt me for it. I learned that being invisible was safer than being seen." The words hung in the air, a quiet accusation that made all four teachers look down at their feet. "We failed you," Mr. Davidson said simply. "We made assumptions based on where you came from, instead of giving you a real chance. That's on us, not you." He took a breath. "But if you're willing, we would be honored to have you represent Lincoln High at the regional competition tomorrow." Lily felt her heart skip. "Really?" "Really," Mr. Davidson said. "You're not just our only option. You're the best option. I've never heard a student play like that in my entire career." The next day, at the regional competition, Lily stood backstage in a simple black dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her find at a local shop. Her hands were steady now. The nervousness from yesterday had transformed into something else. Something that felt like quiet confidence. When they called her name, she walked onto the stage of the huge competition hall. The audience was massive, hundreds of people filling the seats. Other schools' music teachers sat with their students. Parents held up phones to record. Judges sat in the front row with clipboards and serious expressions. Lily looked small walking across that big stage, just like she had looked small walking across the stage at her own school. But when she sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys, something changed. She wasn't small anymore. She was exactly the right size, exactly where she needed to be. And then she played. She played the way her grandmother had taught her, with her whole heart and soul. She played for every person who had ever been dismissed or underestimated. She played for everyone who,